Assalamu alaikum, peace be upon you. My name is Brother Omar El Rashid, and I'm the author, poet, and Peaceful Heart's Guide. And I wanted to share with you something that I've been thinking a lot about lately, and that is the problem and the pain that a lot of us feel with, and in some cases because of our family. You know, family is one of these essential bonds that Allah has created in our lives that is supposed to be a safe haven. It's supposed to be a place where we take shelter and comfort and ease. It's supposed to be something that helps us and nourishes us to grow and to be the best versions of ourselves that we can be. And for many, that's the reality. But for many, many more Muslims, we are struggling in this modern era with our families. There are many, many toxic relationships that are happening. Some of them are cloaked in the garb of Islam, and these things are justified and explained away when the proper name for it is, parental abuse. Like, that is a real thing. And in other families, particularly those from a revert background or those who have changed and embraced the path of Islam, there can be a lot of hostility from the family of origin when someone has chosen a new path for themselves. And whether you're a convert or revert, or whether you were born and raised Muslim or a madhab changer or whatever it may be, all of us can experience in our lives struggles with our family. And for many of us, the only option that we have found is absolute 100% cutting off from those family members. And in Islam, we have this concept, right, from the Prophet and from the Ahlul Bayt, which is Qata' ar-Raham and Silat ar-Raham. Qata' ar-Raham means cutting off the family ties, and that's generally looked down upon in the Islamic tradition. And then there's Silat ar-Raham, which is maintaining the family ties, which is highly encouraged. But how can you maintain family ties with toxic family members? How can you maintain family ties when they are hurting you and jeopardizing your health and your well-being and criticizing and just all around not fun and not enjoyable people to be around? Of course, with all of Islamic principles, there's a balancing act, and it's not all cut and dry, and it's not all black and white. Many parents, culturally immigrant parents, will emphasize all of the importance of obedience to your parents and those kinds of things, but Allah never enjoins obedience in the things that are against the will of Allah and those that are damaging. If you are being hurt or abused or endangered, or your life is endangered, or your parents' wishes are against your own well-being, then by all means, Allah is not going to command you to obey them and to do Silat ar-Raham in that respect. The question is, how can we try to bring some semblance of healing to so many damaged relationships? How, with the pain that I felt from my family members, how can I get over that? So I will tell you that, alhamdulillah, in my family, I've had good relations, in particularly with my brother and with my mother, and over time with my father as well. But I've had some struggling relationships with other family members as well. And there was a time at which I thought that there was no way that I could connect. There was no way that I could maintain the relationship. Every time I tried to help that person, I ended up getting taken advantage of and hurt. Bad ideas, bad advice, hurtful comments, snide remarks, all sorts of other stuff. And again, everybody's level of difficulty is different, right? You can't compare one person's suffering to another, and I would never imagine that I can completely understand what you're going through. But I know that for me, it was difficult having, in many respects, in many aspects of my life, not supportive family members. One of the things that came to me very early on in my path of journeying towards self-discovery, towards embracing Islamic principles and the principles of psychology, social work, and healing of the soul, ilm al-nafsiyya, the knowledge of the soul. All of these things in the Islamic path are very helpful. For early on in this path, I realized that one of the things that becomes important is this Serenity Prayer, which is talked about in many different recovery circles. So the Serenity Prayer says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And there's a second version that says, God, grant me the serenity to accept the people I cannot change, the courage to change the one person I can, and the wisdom to know that that person is me. I have no power over my family. I have no influence, and I have no direct control over what they do, what they say, how they behave, how they treat me. All of that is outside of my control. I have the power to accept and ask God for the serenity to accept that I just don't have the power to control them and how they behave. But I do have power over how I behave, how I respond, and what I choose to do with the negative influences that are thrown at me from family members or others. So again, the question ultimately becomes, what do you do about the people who are, and how do you handle negative family relationships? It doesn't answer the question, but it does offer an insight into what is the first step, which is recognizing our own responsibility to take care of ourselves and also to realize that we are responsible for the choices we make. Now, how can you maintain family ties when people are toxic in our environment? One of the things I like to suggest is using this opportunity to introspect about what it is that we are carrying, taking hold of understanding what are our feelings and what is going on in our world so that we can process our emotions. A lot of us, the reason that we cut off family relations is because we're trying to escape the source of the pain of dealing with what it is that we're dealing with in our family upbringing. If we can disconnect, we tell ourselves that somehow we will feel better and somehow the pain will go away. But it doesn't. It just gets reopened over and over and over, just like picking at a bloodied scab. You know, you have a scab on your leg or on your knee or on wherever it is on your body, and you keep picking at that scab, and every time you reopen it, it bleeds and it hurts all over again. That's what it is when you do qatar raham, when you disconnect from family, and you haven't actually addressed the main cause of the pain. We all have hopes and dreams in our lives. We all have this idealized version of what we wish our family would do for us, what we wish our family was there for us. But when we can take account of what the reality is, the truth of our actual relationships, and when we can take an accounting of the good and the bad, and we can understand and just accept that the relationship that we have, it is what it is. And although it's not perfect, it is what it is. And in that process, we can also learn that we have to grieve the loss of what it is that we were wishing for that we never really received. Everybody, these days especially, everybody is in a wounded family. The dysfunction of our society is so rampant. It's unavoidable for Muslim, non-Muslim, in America and everywhere else in the world, that we're all burdened by so many levels of oppression and difficulty and what we call woundedness, dysfunction, where people are not living in the healthiest way, in the purest way, in the most giving and kind and gentle way. So all of us have scars from the way that we've been raised and the way that we've been living in this world. So the question is, can we find it to accept all of the losses that we've endured, where we can understand that it wasn't perfect, it wasn't easy, and in fact it wasn't right the way that we were treated or the way that our families have evolved. But if we can grieve the loss, that's the key, grieving that loss, coming to terms and understanding and accepting and feeling the pain, feeling the sadness, mourning, crying it out, and then letting it go. Because after you're able to mourn the loss that you've experienced, you are able to then transition, which is the next step of the grief process, where after you mourn the loss, after you grieve the pain, you're able to let it go, and it doesn't weigh down on your soul anymore. It doesn't have to be a permanent fixture. Now, that also means that, if you've grieved the loss and if you've healed on your side, a lot of people will ask the question, well, what about them? What about that person? What if they don't do this? What if they don't apologize for what they've done? It doesn't require, one of the blessings of life and the blessings of Allah is that it doesn't require someone else to make our healing possible. I'm not dependent on my mother or brother or sister or whoever. I'm not dependent on them apologizing to me for me to feel better and to process my grief about what has happened to me. You don't need their participation. Some of us, our family members who we had toxic relationships, have already passed away. And even before they passed, they never gave us that answer that we were looking for, that we wished they would apologize. We wished they would accept blame for the things they did to us. But they've passed away. They're gone. They're no longer here. How can you ask someone for forgiveness who's no longer on the earth, right? But that's the point. It doesn't require the person to be alive. It doesn't require the person to agree. It doesn't require the person to admit their mistakes, for us to process our feelings from whatever has happened. Now, you may be wondering, how do you do this? Because it sounds all good and wonderful, but it's a very tricky thing. Maybe many of us have tried to do this kind of a thing before. One of the things that I've found is that, especially in dealing with long-standing family problems, one of the best ways to be able to do that is to have a guide to walk you through the process. Because it's easy for me, having done it so many times and having guided so many other people through this process, it's easy for me to describe the steps, right? The steps are, you take account of what the harms were, you express all of the anger that you felt about the way that you were oppressed and the way you were taken advantage of, then you grieve the loss, you cry it all out, and then you let it go and you transition back into the place of peace. But what are the actual steps on an actual basis? It's not as easy to describe in a Facebook Live, right? So the reality is, there is a great deal of guidance that can come to a person to show them how not only to process the family stresses and family problems of the past, but the concurrent ones and the problems that continue on. There is a guideway, there is a path, there is a walk that we can take, but it helps to have someone guiding you through that process. So that's something that I help people to do if those are interested. But the real thing that I really want to share is that not only is it possible to make peace with the pains of the past, but it's also possible to heal the relationship going into the future. Some of us have been so hurt by people, and they are so toxic and narcissistic and whatever they may be, in such a way that there can be no healthy relationship with those people. But for many of us with simply strained relationships, there is a way that by working on ourselves, we can transform. And in the nature of us transforming, everyone around us, by virtue of the relationship, transforms along with us. So I can think about a situation that happened in my life. I had a very negative experience with my father. I had invited him to my graduation, and it turns out that when I was graduating, there were two ceremonies. There was the university-wide ceremony, and then there was my graduate school. And in the graduate school graduation, I told him, "Hey, Dad, this is the second ceremony. Do you want to come?" He's like, "Oh, I'm tired. I don't want to go." And rather than sort of encourage him and tell him how important it was, I just said, "All right, if you don't want to come, don't go." So I went to my graduation, and I walked, and I was, free of that. And for many years, he was upset. "Omar, why didn't you invite me to the graduation?" I was like, "I told you about it. You didn't come." But I didn't explain it to him as fully as I possibly could have, and it strained our relationship for a long time. One of the things that I realized, that as I healed my relationship and my feelings of upset towards my father, as a virtue of me healing and forgiving him for his past mistakes and forgiving him for the things that that he did to me that were not nice, by me being able to forgive him, it opened his heart and mine, and now we have a very strong relationship. And the beauty of it is, it wasn't that he asked me for forgiveness for the things that he did that hurt me, or it's not that he apologized or made it right. I did this on my own. I healed my condition. I got my thinking straight. I got my errors back in order. And when I was able to do that and I came back to him, the nature of our relation changed because I changed. A lot of us, when we have difficult relationships with our family members, we expect the other person to change. And we know what they've done wrong. And we know that they're the ones who need to change. And why did you do this? And why did you do that, right? But in this process, we have the ability to change ourselves and purify ourselves. Because ultimately, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the Day of Judgment, He doesn't ask us, what did you do to fix your father? What did you do to fix your mother? What did you do to fix your siblings or anybody else? He asks us, what did you do to fix your soul? What did you do to turn back to Him? What did you do to stand up for the truth and for justice? That's something we have to do for ourselves. And as a byproduct of working on ourselves, oftentimes in very miraculous ways, our relationships with the people around us can be transformed. So, this is just a brief talk. I wanted to cover what I know a lot of people have been struggling with, especially in this time, around the time of Eid al-Adha. There's a lot of family gatherings, and it also brings up a lot of wounds. Holidays can be very damaging and very harmful for many people. And so I just wanted to bring that level of solace, that if you have been struggling with family issues, if there are things that need to be dealt with, the bad news, if you want to call it that, is that you can't change anybody else. But the good news is, if you change yourself and if you handle your side of the fence, so to speak, everything can transform and things can be healed. And even if the other person never changes, your feelings of peace, your feelings of serenity, your feelings of joy, and most importantly, your ability to obey Allah and His command is all healed and can happen in a healthy way. So that's what I wanted to share for today. And with that, I bid you adieu. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. If you'd like to share or post comments or questions or whatever, I'll be able to respond. And feel free to reach out if you wish. Salam.